economic case for LGBT inclusion, and I'm delighted to have our first business person to speak about that, our business leader. So, I quote, as a gay man running the biggest iconic brand in the country, and I'm paraphrasing him slightly here, we have a huge gay community in our workforce, and we want all of our people who come to work every day to feel like they can contribute equally in the organization. So said Alan Joyce, the CEO of Australian airline Qantas, whom I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to Pride and Prejudice. Thank you very much for coming along, Alan.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
A question that came up earlier, which I just want to sort of come back to, and that is that Qantas has supported LGBT communities for a long time. Back in 2004, it had a gay-friendly travel partner program. It's done the Rainbow Roo. It's done a whole series of different things. How important is it for business, do you think, to support these outside of the context of your own business, support these broader initiatives socially?
I think it's really important for business to be at the forefront of this. You know, one of the things that we're pretty proud of is the diversity of our company. As Charles said, I mean, I'm an Irishman, a gay Irishman running the largest iconic brand in Australia. I was at a big seminar with a lot of Indigenous people recently. The Indigenous community is a little bit there's a lot of discrimination in that community, and one girl put up her hand and asked a question, and she says, "I'm an Indigenous girl. My aspiration is to be one day the CEO of Qantas. Do you think I'll ever get there?" And the greatest answer I could give is, well, if a gay Irishman can, then definitely an Indigenous woman can get there one day. And I truly believe that's the case. And we do sponsor a number of very important social causes as well. We do have a reconciliation action plan, part of which is we are sponsoring the Recognise campaign to get the Constitution of Australia changed to have a component for Indigenous people. I'm part of the Male Champions of Change, nearly every senior business leader in Australia that's looking at gender diversity within the organisation. And of course, given my background, LGBT diversity within business and promotion of that is really key. And one of the things we got involved in at a very early stage was the Australian Marriage Equality campaign, which I think appeared, first of all, the ads appeared with 15 logos from different companies around Australia. Qantas was one of them, I'm proud to say. Here we are a year or two later, and there are 800 different company logos on that ad supporting that campaign. And I think it's very important for the corporate world to be out there supporting these causes, to recognise diversity in all aspects in our organisations, because there is a really solid business case for us doing that.
Do you have to sell this to your stakeholders and your shareholders at all, this idea?
No, I think from my point of view, I mean, a lot of companies in our region, a lot of companies that we're competing against, the social responsibility and environmental responsibility are a big part of what people are looking for companies to be involved in. And you know, we do sponsor a lot of other causes outside of these ones, on health, on social awareness of health issues in regional communities, in male and females. We do a lot of different campaigns that we think are important to our contribution back to society, and these are examples of it. And when I look at, you know, our customer base, when I look at our staff, I know that making sure that Qantas represents the Australian community generally, and people are proud of Qantas as representing the Australian community, is really key for me. A lot of our employees are gay, as we mentioned there, from LGBT community. A lot of our customers are. You know, there was a piece of surveys, and Lee's, I thought, statistics earlier were fascinating, but a piece of survey material I thought was fascinating was that the gay communities, the LGBT communities in the US, in the UK, and in Australia as example, in terms of the size of the disposable income, are over $700 million billion in the US, 81 million pounds in the UK, and $20 billion in Australia. And 78% of LGBT families would say that they will spend their money with a company that promotes diversity over a company that doesn't. So it is powerful as well. But it is also, I mean, we're all competing for the same talent pool out there. We're all competing for people that are good at the jobs that they do. And I look at the senior management team of Qantas, and I've got mathematicians, management consultants. I've got 3 women, 2 of which are in 2 of our business units. I've got a couple of gay men on the senior leadership team. As I said, people from America, the UK, from New Zealand. That diversity really helps us develop better strategy, better risk management, better outcome, and it helps run the company better. And if Qantas wasn't appealing to that community more broadly, we wouldn't be appealing to people willing to work in our business and help develop our business and promote our business. And I think there's a solid case to my shareholders, to my board, for us to participate in this.
Well, let's talk about that issue of better results as a result of being more inclusive. And I think Simon brought up this question too about how on earth you measure what the outcome of being more inclusive and diverse is as an organization. I mean, broadly about diversity first, and then about LGBT. What is it exactly? Let's pinpoint what it is exactly you think are the benefits and and how do you measure those?
Well, first of all, I think there have been a lot of different studies that are done and saying, does a diverse workforce, does a diverse management team, does a diverse company outperform others? And I think a McKinsey study showed that that typically 35% of companies can outperform their peers by having a more diverse atmosphere and culture than ones that don't. But I think what I see, and I can tell you what I see in terms of running a large company like Qantas, and Qantas is a $16 billion company that flies to every continent on the globe, has 30,000 employees. What I find is that when we have an inclusive culture with a diverse culture, and I think inclusiveness is important as diversity, because if you don't have that, don't have people willing to express their views and be open, then I don't think you get the right outcomes. But once you have that environment, our senior management debates and discussions, you get better strategy outcomes. You have people saying something which I think, God, why didn't I think of that? And then you realize, well, that's why we have a diverse senior management team. It's because people will come from their own different experiences, their own different backgrounds, come up with better strategies, or come up with ways of mitigating the risks around those strategies. And it's helped us come through a very difficult period. I mean, Qantas 2 years ago lost over $2 billion. But this year, we're just celebrating the fact that 2015 was the best year in a 95-year history in terms of performance. And we're outperforming our competitors massively in the region. And I put a lot of it down to the diversity and focus on diversity. The other aspect is people working for you. As I said, I know I have a large LGBT employee group. And one of the stats in Australia that really struck me is that 51% of people in Australia, which is probably ahead of a lot of countries, feel comfortable being open as an LGBT person to their entire colleagues at work, 51%. I think of the countries being surveyed around the world, the Netherlands is higher than Australia at 66, but we're at 51. Now, if you think of that, that's a lot of people that are not comfortable, that are hiding the fact in some aspect. And I think Lee talked about the depression and the health issues around that. In Australia, again, I think the stats show that LGBT people are 3 times more likely to be depressed. The suicide rates of young gay men are 7 times the national average. Now, that does have an impact on productivity. And again, if you try and measure that back to what that means in sick days, in health issues, and productivity, some studies have come out and said you could get from a completely open, inclusive environment, you can get 30% improvement in productivity, which could be worth, for an economy like Australia, hundreds of millions of dollars, and companies like Qantas, millions, if not tens of millions of dollars to the bottom line.
How open do you feel Qantas is now as a result of all of these policies? Because quite clearly one of the things we're discussing today is just how difficult it is, as you mentioned, for people to be clear about their sexuality or their gender identity within companies.
I think it's going to be more and more important for business leaders who come from the LGBT community, or any leaders, whether it's in defense, business, or politics, to be open about their sexuality and open about why this is an important issue. That's why I'm passionate about it, and I think you're seeing more of it. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, I think you're seeing more and more leaders. I know a lot of the business leaders in Australia that are open. The former head of David Jones, a big department store.
And how important is it for business leaders such as yourself to stand at the top? What is the tone from the top, in a sense? Is that critical in driving this? Or?
I think it's very critical. I think the tone from the top and taking the leadership in the public domain and making sure that people recognise that they know LGBT people and that you have the opportunity to get on and run a company, and that they're role models, that you don't need to have it hidden for you to progress within your career. They're chairman of companies, CEO of companies, they're generals, whatever it may be, that have come from that background. I think that makes a difference. I think the ambassador earlier made a great stat, I thought, about, was it in the 80s that 20% of people in America thought he knew somebody from the LGBT community. Now it's 90%. Now, I think one of the great things about the Irish referendum that took place on marriage equality was that a lot of people came out and said for the first time, politicians, newsreaders, the son of the president of Ireland, I'm from the LGBT community and this is important to me. And what got that momentum behind that campaign was people realising they knew people from that community. And that makes a huge difference. So I think business leaders, politicians, army generals, wherever it is, will make the difference in making it more acceptable to communities everywhere in the world. And I think it's an important aspect if you're in these jobs to do that.
Well, let's come back to the referendum and the plebiscite in a second, but just on the question of the differences across the diversity spectrum within your company and how you manage that process, because quite clearly the issues, and we raised this earlier, the issues are somewhat different across them. So for women and for gender, it's more of a question of underrepresentation. For the gay community, it's more of a question of having the right space, the right environment to be able to feel comfortable at work and be who you are, in a sense. So how do you manage those different diversity and inclusion questions, and what approaches do you take to them?
Well, I think like anything, we have internal and external programs to try and promote the diversity that we're operating on. And internally, we have a diversity council, which my senior leadership team are all very passionate about leading and being involved in. They know I'm obviously very passionate about it. We have a talent management process that really focuses on diversity as well as part of it. And we have different programs to try and cover the different aspects of diversity we're trying to promote. But across it all, we have similar programs that we think makes a difference. We were talking earlier, Charles, about unconscious bias, and I'm a big believer that that's there in every organisation. And we've put all of our 500 senior managers through trying to understand what unconscious biases do they have, and how does that influence them in terms of their selections.
What were the outcomes of that?
That was fascinating. I had even senior women in my leadership team saying that they didn't realise they had unconscious bias in how they ran their management and their parts of the organisations. Things like organising meetings in the morning at 7 o'clock when some people, male and female, have to get the kids to school. Doing things and demanding answers at weekends, and having a culture that doesn't come to be flexible to family life these days. Or even, when you ask questions at an interview, and how you ask the questions at an interview that are biased against sometimes a woman getting a job compared to a man getting a job.
And does the issue of stereotyping come out as well?
And it does. I think it's all part of that as well. And the automatic assumption that maybe if a man's been interviewed for a job, that does he have a family and kids, and married with a wife, and not making those assumptions as you're going through it. But then we have individual programs that are really focused on each of the groups that have to be tailored for them. We have a reconciliation action plan for the Indigenous community. We also then have an external program, and we have an ethical procurement policy where we try and promote procurement from Indigenous communities, trying to promote the diversity of procurement, making sure where we're procuring stuff from is ethically correct. And that fits into a lot of our programs and helps with it. And then advertising. You mentioned, the Mardi Gras in Australia is on this Saturday, and it's a big gay and lesbian event. And for the last few years, Qantas has had a float on that. And one of the biggest things that we did to promote diversity in the group was have the Qantas tail, which is an iconic tail of the kangaroo, go down the march of Oxford Street as a rainbow. Not the red that's usually there, but a rainbow behind it with a kangaroo on it. And then in our head office, after Mardi Gras parade took place, we had that tail in head office for over 6 months as the first thing you saw when you come into our
Maybe it
campus.
should be a permanent fixture, Alan. A question from the audience, Alan. Let's go to this. If I can almost read it there. Consumer boycotts are used against discriminatory companies. Should pro-LGBT companies be cautious about the companies that they do business with based on their approach to discrimination issues?
Well, I think you always have to encourage. I mean, I think we talked about our procurement policies, and all things being equal, we are, for example, in gender diversity, we're looking at what we can do in terms of promoting that and encouraging people to have diversity within their companies out there as well. I'm a big believer that at the end of the day, the best way to get other companies and other organisations to enhance diversity is for them to hear people talking about the benefits it gives their business, to talking about the power, the economic power of the pink dollar as an example, the economic power of females making the purchase decisions, the fight for talent and the benefits it gives you in having better decision making, the productivity benefits that you get for people believing that their organisation is inclusive. I think I'm more of the carrot type of person and encouraging them with the positives of getting there than saying that there should be a stick approach to these things.
I'm sure there must be some questions and thoughts in the room down there, and please, in the centre there.
Hi, my name's Ryan. I'm from HR Magazine. I was just wondering, what do you feel are still? Do you still think that leaders still face, like gay leaders, do you think they still face challenges in getting into leadership roles? If so, what are those challenges, and how do we overcome them?
So the question was, do you think gay leaders face challenges getting into, or gay people
gay people face
challenges getting into leadership roles?
Yeah, getting into leadership roles.
Yeah.
I think every company, organisation, and country is probably a bit different on it. You know, I'm actually a big supporter of Australia. I think it's an amazing country and it's a meritocracy, and I'm lucky enough to live there. I'm lucky enough to run probably the iconic Australian company. And if you can imagine, for a gay Irishman, who I've been very open, you know, when the decision was made, my board and the organisation was very aware of my background, and that never became a consideration within the discussion if he was going to take over. And I don't think it would ever be a consideration in the future in the organisation. I'm not blind to the fact that that's probably not the case everywhere. But I think as more and more examples of the success and achieving a lot from the gay community in those opens up those ideas and breaks down those barriers, I think that's the best way of getting there. I think what's phenomenal, you know, makes you wonder, maybe it's one of your competitors, but the Financial Times
Don't mention
do an outstanding awards each year, and they're starting to promote very heavily around the globe what business leaders from the LGBT community are doing in different countries around the globe. And I think that also enhances this, because more and more it's becoming more and more obvious that there are a lot of companies around the globe that are run by people from the LGBT community, and companies that are doing exceptionally well. And I think that's what will break down the barriers and make it easier for the next generation and the generation after that.
Sort of just following on from that, a segue to that, do you have a question from the application, from the app, do you have any personal discrimination stories you can share from your own career?
Oh, I think I've probably not directly personally for me. I mean, we had a bad industrial dispute in 2011, so probably the worst that I've seen was then a whole series. I came out of my office, and my personal assistant, who'd been with me for a good number of years, was in tears because of the homophobic, aggressive emails that took place. And that was probably the only time where it really hit home as something extremely aggressive. I've been lucky enough that it's never been any more it's done in a cowardly way through emails and other mechanisms rather than directly to my face. I have seen, to go back to that gentleman's question earlier, one of the things that I found heartbreaking a bit was when we had a couple of big events, And some young kids going through organisations in Australia came up to me, one guy in particular, and was talking how difficult it was for him to be open and out in his work environment, and the discrimination and the abuse that he was getting. And the other one was a letter I got from a young student in the Trinity College where I went to university back in Dublin, who that wrote me a heartbreaking note about how difficult it was for them. And I thought, I was in university over 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I thought that would be a lot more different today than it was back then, but things don't move on in some places, and there's still a lot of bigotry out there, unfortunately.
I want to see if there are any other thoughts and questions from the floor. Down, I've been ignoring that side. Down over here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Richard Seeley from Bank of America. You mentioned obviously the excellent performance of Qantas earlier on, and congratulations on that. You went on to say that you felt that the diverse policies, potentially that relating to LGBT diversity, had contributed in some way to that success. Many of us are working in organisations where numbers tend to be the holy grail, and I was wondering if you have any direct sort of numerical evidence to demonstrate that your D&I policies contributed, and to what extent, to that success.
Can I just repeat the question? Do you have any direct evidence that your D&I policies have contributed to the success that you have at Qantas?
Well, it's very hard to identify directly a correlation between one thing and another. But what I will say is that if I look at my senior management team, as I said, I have 4 operating divisions. 2 of them are run by women. The one operation division, Jetstar, just had its record half ever in its 13-year history, made more money than any other full year in its history. My loyalty program, which is doubled in profitability over the last 5 years, again run by a woman. And I have on the senior leadership team, the man who's been running our transformation program. We attracted him back from the States, who was a senior consultant in Bain. He came back from the States, but then he wanted to work for Qantas because of its open, diverse culture, and he's ran our transformation and strategy through this most difficult period. Now, would I have been able to attract that talent without Qantas being seen as open and diverse? Maybe, but I think it was a lot easier because the company is seen in that space and people want to work from it because they know it's a meritocracy, they know they will do well, no matter what their gender, what their sexual orientation, what their colour, what nationality they were born from. And I think that's letting us attract some of the best talent in the aviation industry, and why I have such a capable management team, and that's what I think is a big correlation between that and the turnaround of the company.
Well, Alan, just to follow up to that, the question on the app there, was Qantas, and put you on the spot here, was Qantas as inclusive before you took the helm?
I think I think every organisation evolves over time, but going back into the 80s, Qantas, we talked about Mardi Gras, was one of the first companies that sponsored that festival. And I think we've always been, I think we were one of the first companies that implemented the Reconciliation Action Plan before a lot of Australian companies did that. So we've always been, I think, at the forefront of this. So when you think this company's been around for 95 years, it's a company I'm pretty passionate about because it's evolved and changed quite a bit to survive, and it keeps on adapting its business strategy, and I think it adapts its personnel and management strategy to cope with the times and make available the times. Yeah, but it had to implement policies. We talked about recognising same-sex couples. Our policies have changed over time, but it has been a very progressive company over a long period of time.
Well, we've got a chance. I'm going to be the last question, and coming back to something you raised earlier, and that is gay marriage. I mean, you were happy to see the passage of the Irish referendum, but I understand you're not a particular supporter of the plebiscite that's being proposed for Australia. How important is gay marriage as an issue for the gay community, and why aren't you a supporter? 2 questions, actually. Why aren't you a supporter of the plebiscite?
Well, first of all, I mean, Ireland was very different. Ireland has had like 50 referendums since the Republic was created in the 1940s, and clearly its constitution is very tight, and it had to do a referendum. And what was great was all the political parties got behind that and supported it. And it was amazingly emotional when I found that the vote went through, but such huge majorities. I'm from a working class district of Dublin, and it voted 74% in favour of marriage equality in Ireland, which is amazing how far we've come over a period of time. And you can't have the vote when you're outside of Ireland. If you left within 18 months, you didn't get the vote. But there's this campaign on social media, going home to vote, flying home to vote. And all these people from all over the world that had only been out from 18 months went back. It was amazingly emotional, amazingly positive. The thing in Australia, like the other parliaments around the world, the UK Parliament and a lot of the Europeans, it can be voted up by Parliament. It doesn't need to go to a plebiscite.
And why not?
And I think we have some parts of the Parliament that don't want it to be decided by Parliament as a delaying tactic, and probably a tactic it was a tactic just to delay it, because I think there was momentum happening after the Irish and the US Supreme Court vote. The plebiscite in Australia cost $160 million. It's a huge amount of expense, and I think the money could be spent on other things. The government nearly a few weeks later talked about spending $100 million on domestic violence, which is a big issue in Australia. And I, for one, think they should spend $260 million on that and not waste 160 on a plebiscite. The opinion polls in Australia say 72% of people are in favour of marriage equality. So we have a clear majority, but going through a plebiscite, to me, I think there's better things that you can do and spend the money on. Now, why are we very keen on it, and why do I think it's important? Well, any piece of legislation that says somehow the LGBT community is somehow inferior to other communities is just wrong. And that encourages the depression, encourages and doesn't solve our problems around the suicide rates, because what that means is that the state is sending a message and somehow your relationship is different. I might make one last comment on this. I mean, I think the case is there is so positive for us doing it, and making and sending a message that the gay community, the LGBT community is equal. There's also an economic case. It's funnily enough, I think one economist worked out that there are 33,000 same-sex couples in Australia, and 51% of them by survey says they will get married if they were allowed to do it. And if they spend the same amount as the rest of the community do on a marriage, that's a $700 million boost to the economy overnight, which is a great stimulus package if it was to occur. And in this day and age, that might be a great thing to do.
Alan, I wish we could continue, but we've run out of time. Alan, Joyce, thank you very much.
Thank you.